Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We would like to welcome you all to the 9.4 community webinar. We are joined today by Dirk Morris, founder and chief technology officer here at Untangle, myself, Sean Gardner, I'm the sales manager here, and we'll have some other staff helping with the Q&A that we'll be doing throughout the webinar. We will appreciate your willingness to join us today, and we'd like to give you a special thanks to all of the community members, beta testers, and developers that have helped continue to make Untangle one of the best products in the market. Hopefully the things we share today will provide value and insight into the direction Untangle is going with our product. This webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the webinar will be sent out within the next 24 hours. We also will be posting this webinar link on our website as well for anyone new to Untangle. As far as housekeeping goes, with the GoToWebinar format, if you're having any problems hearing the speakers, you can adjust your sound on the panel on the right-hand side of your screen. And you can also let us know through the question and answer panel in the same area so we can make any adjustments or try to help you in any way we can. We will be trying to answer questions today through the question and answer panel, and we'll also try to pull in some of those questions into the actual discussion so that they can be answered for everyone. We really have a lot to cover today on our agenda. So if we can jump in, we'll be going over the new version of 9.4. We have an all-new captive portal to discuss with some really cool and terrific use cases to showcase and show you about. We've got a lot of enhancements done in the session viewer and on the host table, as well as there's quite a few items that we can discuss about the new version. So let's get started. You want to take over, Dirk?
Sure, that'd be great.
Let me make you the presenter real quick here.
Thank you, Sean, and thanks everybody for joining. As always, I'm going to be talking through some of the technical details on the new stuff in version 9.4. As always, you can follow along by just going to wiki.untangle.com, clicking on changelogs, and clicking on the 9.4 changelog, which details most of the important big changes in 9.4. So I'm just going to walk through these and show you some of the stuff, new stuff in the UI. If there's any questions, just type them in the question box, and a couple people are online, hopefully can answer some of those. If not, we'll loop back and answer as many as we can at the end. So with that being said, I'm going to dive right in because we got a lot of changes to discuss. So real quick, some of the major platform changes. You'll notice some of the apps have new icons. Basically, we've been meaning to do this for a while, but it's a lot of work with all the documentation and videos and all that. We just wanted a nice consistent feel with all of the icons, so we've done them all in blue backgrounds and retouched them up a little bit. So we think it gives it a nice new look. There's a new host table. I will go into detail a little bit more in a minute on that. An improved session viewer, I'll also go a little bit into that more in depth in a minute. New rules and conditions. So basically you'll notice that over the past many years we've been working on standardizing the rules, and the way rules work, of course, is you create a rule, you give it a name, and then you add a bunch of conditions, and if all those conditions match, then some action is performed. So this is firewall, so the action is just pass or block, and then you can alternately flag or not. So we added some new conditions in here, especially for some of the other apps. So things like client user OS. So you can match rules based on whether they're Linux or Windows or iPads and things like that. You can also match on whether they've exceeded quota now in other apps. Whether they're in the penalty box. The penalty box is now a global concept. Previously it was just a bandwidth control concept. Now it's a global concept. So you can do things like if somebody's in the penalty box for, say, using BitTorrent, whatever rule you set up, you can now have them subject to captive portal, which means they get a warning that says you shouldn't be doing this, click continue. Or you can just block them from the internet, which seems to be what a lot of people want to do, although I would not suggest that. We open up a different...
Hey, Dirk, on your mouse movements, they're a little choppy, so I don't know if you can slow down just slightly so that the people, when they're watching, can catch up to you.
Sure.
Thank you.
So now in bandwidth control, you'll notice there's a whole lot more in bandwidth control. A lot of these were here before, but there's also some new ones here. In the wiki, if you go to the rules page, there's a whole lot of detail about rules and how they work. They're always evaluated in order, and then it talks about the conditions. And there's this big condition list, and these are the matchers, so to speak, of the different things you want to add to say when a rule matches or not. I would go and look through these because they describe what each one does, and it's not always as intuitive as you think. So like HTTP content length is greater than some number. That will match on large web downloads, for example. Or, as I was saying earlier, client user OS. That matches on the string that is the OS portion of the user agent string that's presented by the browser of the OS. And I'll show a little bit about that in the host table in a minute. So there's a lot of new powerful stuff in here that should allow you to hit some of those more interesting use cases, and also give a lot of new functionality to the penalty box, since it's now accessible by all apps as well as quotas. So you can do neat things like send people who are over quota to a special rack and then have them subject to a special captive portal, things like that. So again, look on the rules page. They give you some ideas of some of the things you can do with new rules. We're always working to further standardize the rules. One thing I will say real quick is some of these conditions are only available at the beginning, or they're all available at the beginning when a session's created, but some of them are only available later, deeper in the session. So like HTTP hostname, that is not known when the session is created. So you can't match on that in Firewall because there is no HTTP hostname at that point. You just have a packet that says I want to connect to some server. Later in the session, it'll say get untangle.com/index, and you know, okay, the host name is untangle.com, and it can match later in the session, but Firewall's already approved the session at that point. So some of these are only available in things that match in, quote, deep sessions, which is after the session is created. Moving right along, a couple new UI alerts have added. UI alerts are these things up at the top. If you see them, you probably have something you need to address. Here's a good example of one. This one just says that upgrades are available because there's a new build available to this server, so I can actually go and upgrade it if I want over an upgrade. But sometimes you'll see things like your DNS settings are wrong, or it can't contact the internet, or it's running low on disk space. If you see one of these, you need to address it, whatever it is. So we've added a couple new ones. Also, we check Untangle connectivity to our data center, which is where updates are served. It's where the store and the app downloads happen. So if you can't connect to our data center, you're not going to have a very good experience. So there's a warning here saying we can't connect to untangle.com. Probably won't see it very often because usually you'll see the one that says I can't connect to the internet, period, in that case. A couple bug fixes. A couple important bug fixes for foreign characters, meaning non-English ASCII characters, should now save correctly in a couple cases that weren't before. So now I'm going to go into Captive Portal. Captive Portal received a whole new implementation. So a little bit of the background of Captive Portal is it used to be down here in services, which meant it was global. You'd have one Captive Portal, and you could find the rules, and that was pretty much it. And it worked. It was fine. It didn't behave as well as some of the apps like Web Filter and Firewall and so on. It was a little rough around the corners because it was doing some kernel level stuff. But it left some to be desired in cases where larger sites wanted to have a separate Captive Portal for one network versus another. Or perhaps they only wanted to subject people to the Captive Portal that weren't already known via some other username technique like the Active Directory login script. So there are cases that we couldn't do with this global Captive Portal. And we really like the rack model because then it allows you to set up all these different racks. And obviously that's working for all the other apps like Web Filter and Firewall and so on. So what we did is we moved it up to the top of the rack. So now you can have a different Captive Portal. Let me go to a rack that has one. So here we have a special rack on this network dedicated to our wireless users. And actually it's the same as the default rack except it has a Captive Portal. So here you can see that it's blocking people who aren't authenticated. In this case, all you have to do is actually just click OK and log in. But so the new Captive Portal allows you to install on different racks, which hits a lot of nice use cases. So here, for example, this is just our internal wireless in the company where you have to agree to something before you can get to the internet. You just click I agree and click continue. The new rules are exactly like firewall rules or anything else. So instead of the old rules that have a thing you can now match on all sorts of different things. So there's a couple ways to do it. You can create fancy rules here, or you can create fancy rules in policy managers that send traffic to a special rack that you want to capture and then capture everything in that rack. So it's really personal preference. Here we basically say capture everything coming in on interface 4, which is the wireless, that also happens to be going through this rack. But you could do things like user OS, well, I only catch iPads. In fact, I actually think we have a special, let me. So I'm going to go into Policy Manager. So we have a couple of special Policy Manager rules. One that sends all wireless users to the wireless rack, and one that sends all iPad users to the iPad rack. Let me find that one. And the way it does that is it uses the client user OS. And it says, if that string matches star iPad star, which it does for iPads, then send it to the iPad rack, which we have a separate captive portal for iPads. We just do that just for fun. It's more or less the same. It just says, you know, you have to log in to continue, or you have to agree to continue. And so then in that, I have the same rules. This says capture everything in the iPad rack. So this should give you some idea of how you can treat the reason this was an issue for schools and things is they had a lot of devices that people were bringing in they wanted to treat differently. So they wanted to treat student iPads differently than Android devices, differently than the PCs. And one global captive portal wasn't enough. So now we've moved to top the rack, and we think that'll be much better. We've also totally redone how the custom page works. So you can read up on the wiki about how that's done. The new one is simpler and more powerful. So we provided a couple examples. We're working on a couple more complex examples, even things like linking it to your PayPal account and requiring people to pay and things like that. So we've been working on examples like that. There's already a good custom example, which is custom text, and there's a more complicated one where it's actually a mock hotel where you make them enter the room number and then you log that room number. Other than that, most of the things are pretty much similar in the captive portal. The rules are different, but the other settings are very similar to the old one. And you can see people logging in, logging out. This just says anonymous because on this captive portal we don't actually make them log in. We just make them agree. Are there any questions about captive portal that might be? So there's a question about, I'm very interested in client user OS for blocking iPods and Androids and things like that. What is the syntax? So let me actually loop back now to the host table, because I think now is a good time to talk about the host table. So previously in 9.3, all the user tracking was done in Directory Connector. That's now been moved to part of the platform, what we call the quote host table. The host table creates this big table of all of the local hosts and what it knows about them. And you can actually view that they show host down here. So you click at the top of the rack, click on drop down, you click show host. This shows all the hosts on this network at the current time. So one of the fields you'll notice is HTTP user agent OS. By the way, you can always click these drop downs, and there's actually more columns that aren't shown by default. We don't show them all because it's a little overwhelming. I'm going to go ahead and add the user agent. So when browsers connect to websites, they present what's called a user agent string. So when I connect to Google.com, my browser says, hey, by the way, I'm Firefox running on Windows 7, and here's all the info about my build and what version I'm running. Or if I'm connecting, you know, so you can see all the different user agent strings. This one's Mozilla 5, Macintosh, Intel. It's an Intel-based Mac. This is probably Safari. You can read up about user agent strings on the web, but basically you can decipher from this what type of client is connecting and what type of machine this guy is. So in this guy, this is a Windows machine. I can tell because it's a Win32. This guy's a Linux machine. I can tell because it says Linux 686, X11. That's probably Iceweasel's Firefox. So there's all this information encoded in this user agent string. The user agent OS is actually just a special portion of that string that's between the parentheses. So here's the host on the network, and here's the ones that have obviously done some HTTP traffic and want me to know. So if I want to separate out the Linux ones, you can notice that Linux is contained in a lot of them. So let's just say I wanted to add a special rack. Let me open up a new window for this. I wanted to add a special rack, or just create a policy rule that sent Linux machines to a special rack. The way I would do that is just go to Rules, click Add, Linux machines, and then I'd say Client User OS, and it matches like a glob, which is explained in the documentation. I can just do basically star Linux star, which is going to match anything with Linux in it. If you read up on iPad user agent strings, iPad matches iPads, iPhone also matches, Android. But basically, if you just go into your host thing and you read up, say, log into the network with your Android device and see what it learns about the user agent OS, you can then make rules that match those user agent OSs. I wish there was an iPad on the network right now. I don't see any. Yeah, unfortunately there's not. But you would basically see it's saying inside the user agent string that it's an iPad or an iPhone or an Android device.
Hey, Dirk, do we give an option for the MAC address at that host viewer?
No.
Okay.
There's no MAC address concept in Untangle.
Just wanted to make sure.
So the first tab is current host. These other tabs are just similar views on the same data. So I won't go through all those, but they're basically the different views of the same data. Everything can be done via the current host tab. So as I was saying, you can go to columns and you can add all sorts of different columns. We just don't show them all by default because it's too many. It's overwhelming and you have to scroll sideways and things. So pick out what's important to you to see about all these different hosts. So I'll add quota remaining. So we give people 10 gig quotas here, or 100 gigs a day, which is obviously huge. Nobody ever exceeds it. But you can see how much quotas remaining of each person, how many bytes they have left. You can see whether they're in the penalty box or not. You can see what the associated username is. So username can come from a couple places. It can come from the Active Directory login script or Captive Portal. You can see what the host name is, and this can come from a whole bunch of different ways. It can come from DHCP, come from the username map that you actually provided. It also now does reverse DNS in the background and attempts to guess these. If they look up successfully with reverse DNS, it will show a name there. And so that's about it for, I think, the host table. There's also a couple things. There's some functionality here that's worth, you can group these things. So let me see what would be useful to group by. Let's just say I wanted to group by everybody who had a quota versus doesn't. These guys don't even have quotas, and these guys do. So you can group by any of these fields. I can group by IP. Obviously, there's only one entry per IP, so that's not very useful. Or if I wanted to say, oh, no, I want to see everybody who's in the penalty box versus not. And it looks like actually nobody's in the penalty box today, which is good. That means nobody's been using BitTorrent or some peer-to-peer. The other thing you can do is filter. So let me clear grouping down here. Let's just say I only wanted to see Linux host. So I go to Linux user agent OS and I type Linux. And then I see only the Linux machines on my network and what the current status is with them. So there's all sorts of different functionality up here at the top that you can do besides just sorting that allow you to kind of view this data in all sorts of different ways with adding columns, grouping, and filtering. Are there any other questions on that?
Is there ability to, would it be just a print screen if they want to sort like this and then maybe be able to show this data? As far as getting this data for analysis, it's fantastic. I just was wondering if there's any way for them to export or just do a...
I don't think so. We could probably add an export feature, though. I can't see that would be bad.
Yeah, okay. Just
We
curious.
could just spit out the data, I guess. We could probably do that. If you don't use DHCP on Untangle, it won't know the host name from DHCP, obviously, because when you fetch an address via DHCP, sorry, the question was, if I don't use Untangle for DHCP, will it know the host name? It might, but not via DHCP, because when it gets an address, it specifies, hey, I need an address, and by the way, my host name is foo. Obviously, if Untangle doesn't see that request, it's not going to know that host name. It may still get it via some other way, via reverse DNS or the username map, but it's not going to know it from DHCP.
Questions about captive portal? Do you want to go back?
Sure.
We have a couple questions about captive portal. One was, is there a way for users to log out of captive portal via a page?
There's a URL they can hit. I hate to say it off the top of my head because I don't know it off the top of my head and I hate to get it wrong, but it's in the wiki. If not, we'll add it. But basically, I think it's /logout or something. If you hit Untangle IP /logout or something, it'll log you out of the captive portal. So you can do things like you can add a logout script where it'll log them out of the captive portal automatically if they log out the machine and things like that.
And then could you go over what the upgrade path is for users of the current captive portal to the 9.4 captive portal? We have some different questions around that topic.
That's a great idea. So the new captive portal is not compatible with the old captive portal. What we mean is on upgrade, there's no conversion we can do automatically that makes sense. Previously, captive portal was global. So on upgrade, it's no longer global. You have to decide what racks to put it in. And you need to readjust the rules, which are totally different types of rules. So, and obviously the custom page is a totally different format. So your custom page isn't going to work. Your 9.3 custom page, if you have one, is not going to work with the 9.4 format. So in order to upgrade to 9.4, it will not let you upgrade if you have captive portal installed in the rack and on, or just installed in the rack and off, because the conversion will not happen correctly. We don't want people to upgrade and then say, oh my God, my captive portal disappeared. So it will not upgrade automatically if you've got captive portal installed. You may log in, you see that upgrades are available, you click on upgrade. If you click upgrade without removing captive portal, it's going to throw a warning saying, no, you've got captive portal installed in 9.3. I'm not going to upgrade. You have to remove it from the rack. The reason we did that is to force people to realize that they have to then reinstall captive portal, the new one, after upgrade, which is different, and configure it however they want it to be. So in order to get 9.4, if you're not running captive portal, you don't need to do anything. You just wait, and you'll eventually see the upgrades when we roll them out. If you are running captive portal, you'll need to remove it from the rack in order to upgrade. Hopefully that clears a little bit up. I know there's a ton of questions about upgrades. No, we are not. They're not available to the majority of servers yet. We're still working on a couple things. We're rolling it out fairly slowly. It is available for a new download. If you go to untangle.com/download, you can download 9.4 and play with it, or you can just wait a little while, and you'll see the upgrade available soon. If you're really antsy and want it now, you can email support@untangle.com, and they can sort it out. 9.4 has already been released for the guy asking about the release date.
Got a question here, Dirk, from on the captive portal. They're asking if the time before the next login can be extended beyond 1 day.
No, not currently.
The max
You can in the
max is
settings
24
file,
hours,
we just allow it for the UI.
Right.
You can go in the settings file and change it. We do want to allow people to do that because it's not a good idea to do it. And generally, we try to prevent people from doing things that we don't think is a good idea from the UI. But you can log in the settings and change it. Just remember that everything is stored in memory. So if you set it to a month, it's not going to matter. When you reboot, it forgets everybody. Everybody's got to log in again. Every time you upgrade, it's going to forget everything. So you just got to keep that in mind, that just because you say it's a month doesn't mean it's a month. It means it's a month or until you reboot it or you upgrade it or whatever.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
Sorry, we're reading over questions. Sorry, they're coming in really quick. If you did have a custom page from 9.3, you will have to rewrite it. The good news is the 9.4 format, in my opinion, is way easier. It's Python-based. It's not PHP. If it's just visual customization is super easy to do now because you don't need to change the logic or anything. Even if you're doing new logic, it's way easier to do one. There's a couple API calls that's pretty simple, which you can say, okay, authenticate this user or don't, or what to do.
Could you cover the scenario where if they're not authenticated on the Active Directory domain, say maybe they're not a domain-recognized machine, how that actually works in Captive Portal?
Say that again?
The question is, if I use Active Directory Connector, Captive Portal be configured in such a way that it will prompt for login if the connection has no user assigned via the connector.
Oh, okay. Well, so what I would do in that case is, so let's say you're running your Active Directory login script, and you don't want to capture people that have a user
that have the script running, right? Yeah.
So basically, in capture rules, let's say my first rule is capture everybody on an internal. Well, an easy way is just above that say, well, if username is star, meaning anything that's not blank. Oops. Sorry, I logged out.
If you could repeat yourself slightly, you cut out for a second there.
I logged out of the machine accidentally, hit backscape.
Okay.
And Captive Portal's not on this rack, so unfortunately my keyboard is, there we go. So specify custom value star, then don't capture it. Do not capture known users. And drag that above the other rule. So basically what these rules now say is don't capture users that have a known username, and then capture everybody else. Okay. So I hit apply here. So that's a good way to say, hey, great, if you've got Active Directory login script working and it's notifying Untangle who's logged in where when they log in the machine, then don't show them the Captive Portal page because you already know who they are. So you can set that up. You could also do it with a policy manager rule if you wanted to say unknown users go to this rack versus known users go to this rack. You could do it that way as well. There's a couple different ways. But basically you can just use rules to say, well, here's exactly who I want to capture and who I don't want to capture. Hopefully that answers that question.
I think it does, yeah. Are you able to show us the bill case? Like, for example, if somebody owns a Starbucks and they want to be able to charge people to get internet access. Is that something a little too complex as far as a use case we can show, or do we have anything?
You can write a custom page that does it. We're playing around with integrating with PayPal and things. You can certainly do it. We've written the API specifically so that you can do things like that. That being said, it's not to the level where a non-developer can sit down and do it. You need to know what you're doing with Python, and you need to be familiar with whatever back-end systems API that you can say, okay, charge this person. If it goes through successfully, then authenticate them for the next 5 hours.
Right. Okay.
So you can certainly do it. It's just you need to be a developer currently to be very familiar with Python to do it. Hopefully we'll write a custom example at some point where people can kind of just plug in their info. I still think you'll need to be somewhat familiar with Python in order to do that.
Well, just the fact that we're provisioning to make it so that that's possible is a huge step forward, I think, for a lot of the hospitality people that would be interested in that. So that's
yeah, I agree. It's definitely something we got a lot of questions on. That's why we wanted to do this Captive Portal change now, because we feel like Captive Portal is a growing part of Untangle's usage. It seems to be very popular in schools and hotels and everywhere where you have people coming in, especially with mobile devices off the street, and you want to be able to manage them. So the API, yes, if you hire your own developer, the API is already documented in the wiki. You basically just pull the custom example as a starting point. It's a really simple API. Captive page. So down here you'll notice there's a couple custom examples. One's just a login, one's an agree, and one's like a hotel, which is something we just made up, where you make them type in their room number, I think, or something like that, just to show the custom logic. No, Untangle won't run on Raspberry Pi. Unfortunately, Raspberry Pis only have one NIC, but we are looking at supporting ARM at some point in the future. But currently, there's really no good ARM servers that we've found that really fit the Untangle use case. But there are a lot of very good servers that are coming along that are ARM-based. So we're keeping a close eye on that. I'm going to move on to the session viewer just because I don't want to spend too much time. We'll loop back again and cover as many questions as we can. So if you click on the top rack, oh, sorry, I should have gone slower on that. If you click at the top of the rack, you can click on Show Sessions, and that will show you all the sessions that Untangle is currently dealing with. And a lot of these are very similar. The way the session viewer works is similar to the way the host viewer works. In 9.3, there were a bunch of things down at the bottom which you could use to customize it. We've moved all that to the top. So you can click on one of the columns, and again, there's a whole lot of columns that we didn't want to show by default because there's just way too many. But depending on what you're interested in, you can go in here and enable or disable. I'm going to click on a couple. You go in and enable or disable the different things you want to see. I think that's good. So I added a couple columns. I wanted to know what the HTTP hostname was of this session. I wanted to know what the category was of this session. Obviously, that's only going to apply to web traffic. So here you can see somebody going to community forums, personal storage, search engines, google.com. Makes sense. Personal storage. See all sorts of information about each session. Obviously, here's the proto chain, which is what application control knows about this session. Citrix Online, which almost surely is this machine's connection to GoToWebinar, which we're now using right now. And here's another one, here's another one. And then the priority in QoS. I could also show the priority according to bandwidth control, I believe. Which is probably better. So, like, for example, one of the things I just learned from this is we could probably go say Citrix Online should be prioritized very high. Since this webinar is probably one of the more important things going on the network right now, we should probably prioritize that very high instead of medium, just in case anybody were to fire up a download or something.
That's because you're not required to log in.
Yeah, the username in our case is it's only in some of the fields because we don't have usernames associated with these sessions because we don't require people to log in our captive portal. There are some people running the Active Directory login script. So, for example, this IP, 10.0.0.135, is running that. So if I go to the host viewer, let me go back to the other table. You'll notice some of these IPs have usernames associated with them. Like this one, 10.0.0.135. And so you'll notice in the session viewer that, sessions from that IP have a username associated. But these other things are from an IP or host name that doesn't have an associated username, so the username is blank. So, for example, in our rule earlier in Captive Portal, these would all be captured. If we said don't capture everything with a known username, capture all these would all be captured. So depending on how your network's set up, these may be mostly, or they may be all blank, or they may be mostly filled in. So this is really a useful tool to just kind of see what's going on in the network. So I'll just walk through a couple examples. So again, you can do all this stuff from the top of the rack. So let's just say I want to go host name group by this field. Grouping is useful if you just kind of want to see what's going on. Browser's kind of hung for a second. So now it's going to show all the same all the same sessions, just grouped by the host name. So here you can see what each different machine is doing. That's probably a support machine because they're going to support a lot. This person's on Google and Dropbox. I don't see anything abnormal. That person's doing a lot of DNS lookups. That person's on Facebook right now. Let me clear grouping. So you can use grouping to kind of group any sort of different thing you want. You can also group by, say, protochain. If I wanted to say, well, I just want to see what kind of things are going on in the network. Well, group by the protochain, or you can group by web filter category or HTTP host name. You can kind of group by anything you want, and it'll just reorganize the same data, but grouped. So here, okay, here's all the unknown sessions. Those are all bypassed. Then there's just basic TCP stuff, which basically means it doesn't even know what it is. And then there's a bunch of HTTP. Looks like mostly Dropbox. There's some more Dropbox. There's Google. There's a bunch of SSH sessions going on. There's a bunch of SSL stuff. And there's Citrix Online. There's some Facebook messaging going on. Gmail, Google+. So you can just basically use the different things and group by the different things to view the data in different ways. You can also do filtering. So filtering is just useful if you want to restrict your set of things that you're looking at. So let's say I only wanted to see BitTorrent. Well, I could type bit, and that's going to say only BitTorrent stuff. So it's probably empty. It is empty because nobody's running BitTorrent right now, which is good. But if I wanted to say, just show me DNS stuff, you can do that, and you see just DNS sessions. So with the sorting, grouping, and filtering, you really have different ways to slice and dice the data, and also keep in mind that you can turn on and off the different priorities or the different columns. One of the things I like to do is go in here and say grouped by, oops, I want to do bandwidth control. Group by bandwidth control priority. This will show you exactly what buckets are getting put where. Oh, I'm going to remove the filter. So I click clear filters. Now it's going to show all, not just DNS. I had the filter set. So here you can see, okay, very high is a bunch of DNS traffic because we prioritize DNS. I just do that here to make the internet seem a little faster. High priority stuff is important web sessions. SSH gets high priority. Then there's medium, which is kind of the default. So a whole bunch of stuff going on in medium. That's where the majority of our traffic is. And then low. Low is Dropbox stuff in the background. We've prioritized that lowly so that background transfers don't really impact network traffic. So you can use this as a great tool for debugging kind of your bandwidth control rules and how that's set up. Are there any questions on Session Viewer?
Someone said it's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really excited about this. We've been using it a lot. It's just very helpful for us on the support side as well. The session and host stuff isn't totally, I mean, it's available in the event logs, obviously. The session and host viewer is real-time by nature. But the same information basically, let me go back to default rack. Let's say I went to settings and clicked event log. It's basically the same information. This stuff is pulled from the host table, the username, the host. Obviously the URI isn't because that's, but so it shares a lot of info with the event log. You can directly access the database. It's Postgres. If you're familiar with Postgres, it's pretty simple. It's all denormalized in big tables. You can kind of run all sorts of queries, whatever you like. Just keep in mind that modifications for command line, we really can't guarantee your support Untangle that's been modified in certain ways. We are looking at NAC solutions. Somebody asked if we're looking at researching NAC type solutions. Yeah, we've talked to a couple vendors about. The nice thing about Captive Portal now is first we needed to put it in its own in the actual top of the rack. Now that it's done that, we can start talking about extensions to Captive Portal, which would be nice. So things you could do like, don't authenticate them to Captive Portal if they don't have antivirus on their machine. Obviously, that kind of thing requires some client running on the machine. So we've been talking to vendors, researching that, saying, is there some way we can do neat things like that? There's a couple vendors out there that we may work with.
On the session and host viewer, go ahead. Sorry, Dirk.
I was going to answer a little question about going over quota, how to handle that. Like a lot of a frequent use case we had was if my clients go over quota, like say you give them a 1 gig quota every day, you can download that, but after that, what happens and how do you handle it? Probably the best way I like in 9.4 is to go into Policy Manager, create a separate rack for your over quota users. So clear a rack here. I'm not actually going to save this, but over quota. And then go into rules and say, okay, I want to add something that says if the client has exceeded quota, send them to the over quota rack, which I haven't saved, so it's not there yet, but I don't want to save that. But basically, I would set up your own rack for over quota users, and then add Captive Portal to that rack that says, message only, hey, by the way, you've exceeded your quota, your traffic's going to be really, really slow for the rest of the day, have fun, or whatever you want to put on the Captive Portal page. You could also just do it in your current rack without adding a new rack that just says, here's a Captive Portal. If you're not already running a Captive Portal in that rack, you can just add one that says only capture clients that are over quota and then show them that message. So there's multiple ways you can do it, but basically it involves using a rule that says clients that are over quota, treat them specially, either to a new rack or capture them. Hopefully that answers the question.
The question I was going to ask Dirk was just on the ability to do a dump of the event, the host viewer, the session viewer. Is that something that would be available possibly in future as far as what they're looking at and what they've parsed and analyzed? Would they be able to dump that to a print file or to a document somewhere else?
Possibly.
Or they need to do that?
It seems like a good idea, I'll say that much, but it won't be a 9.4 because 9.4 is already pretty much baked.
No, obviously, yeah. But is that something they could do in like Postgres and pull that data that way if they really needed it now?
No, because it's not in Postgres. It's live data. It's basically a host table in memory that tracks all the information about all the different hosts. That can't be stored on disk because performance reasons. Where you can never hit the disk basically with threads processing network traffic. And since the host table is the hotspot for things processing network traffic, it can't be on the disk.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we're reading the questions. We're getting a lot of questions. We're doing as many as we can. While they're looking through questions, I'm going to talk about a couple other things. Obviously, I talked about the session viewer. Bandwidth control. There's no major changes to how we did bandwidth control. The UI is a little bit different because the quotas and penalty boxes are now global. So they used to be tabs where each bandwidth control had their own penalty box and quota. The problem was then other apps couldn't leverage that functionality. So we made those global. So when you're putting the penalty box, you're not putting the penalty box global, and then Firewall and Captive Portal can treat you differently. Same with quotas; they can see if you're over quota or not. So it simplified the UI a little bit. The real major change we did is the default rule set. So on upgrade, this won't affect you because you keep your existing rule set on upgrade. It's not going to change anything. But on new installs, or if you were to rerun through the wizard, basically we changed the way the default rule set that you would get. So I'll just go ahead and run through this. So we've got 2 WANs, which is why I asked you for the different settings for each WAN. So let me say we're a school and what school does. So previously we had a lot of things that said, okay, things like social networking, web traffic gets a normal priority. And things like video and entertainment websites get normal priority. The problem is that the web is so complicated that when you hit one website, you're pulling content from dozens of different websites, some of which may be, quote, social. So you hit CNN.com. Well, everybody, unfortunately now, maybe I should say fortunately, unfortunately now integrates with, say, Facebook. And Facebook is a social networking site. So what would happen was you'd hit CNN. CNN would pull content from Facebook. Maybe it's just a JavaScript file or something. But that JavaScript file would download at a normal priority. So when your network would get busy, most sites would actually seem to be slow, even though the sites themselves got high priorities, because they depend on content from sites that weren't getting high priorities. So this affected larger sites more than others, because the larger sites had content, more content in those higher buckets, which was starving out the regular buckets. So what we did is basically change it so that web typically gets high priority. The downside to doing that is, wait a minute, that means if I'm downloading a 10 gig file, that the whole 10 gig is going to be high priority, which is exactly what I don't want, because downloading is not something that needs a high priority. It's not done in real time. You know, VoIP traffic should get a high priority than, say, a download, because saving 1 second on a 2-hour download really doesn't matter. So what we did was say, okay, let's prioritize all 480 except downloads of things that are large. So the net effect, I think, is you'll get a much better experience with the new rule set, the new default rule set, because port 80 is going to get prioritized more than it was previously. And when people say my internet's slow or fast, what they basically mean is my web is slow or fast. We've kind of found that to be true. The responsiveness of the web is what determines most people's internet experience. So if you want those new default rule sets, just run through the bandwidth control setup wizard again, and you'll get the new rule set. It's a change in all the different rule sets: schools, businesses, hotels. We have a ton of different ones, and they're all based differently on user feedback. They're all fairly similar. There's all basically a base use case, and then they're tweaked a little bit for schools. So schools will say things like, well, prioritize, you know, educational sites and things like that, and don't prioritize things like games. Versus home, obviously you don't want to deprioritize games. That's what people do at home. You want to prioritize games. So they're all a little bit different, but they're all based in the same way. I'm going to read some questions real quick. The host table, the way the saving works, I think, is there's a couple of columns that said last access and last modified. If a host hasn't been seen in a long time, it's dropped from the host table. We don't track all hosts, because if you have a port forward, well, then the whole internet connecting to, say, your email server. We only track hosts on non-WAN interfaces. So this isn't going to track remote hosts. So here you'll see all your local hosts, basically. But there's a couple columns, I think, like we don't show by default last access time, which will show you when it was last modified. And if it's really, really old, it gets dropped eventually, because that host is probably offline. There's a lot of questions about SSL, SSL via web, SSL via email. SSL is encrypted. Just to be clear, it's totally encrypted. Untangle cannot scan SSL. However, there's a couple ways that you can do it in web filter currently. It'll read the certificate, which has a non-encrypted portion of it to see the host name. In a lot of cases, a lot of browsers support an extension called SNI, which allows you to see what hosts are talking to, so categorization and blocking can be done via that. Pretty much every modern browser except IE on XP does that. If you're still running IE on XP, it's not going to send SNI information. We are looking at doing full SSL man in the middle, which will require you to push a root CA certificate out to all your clients, and then you can actually decrypt the session. We'll probably do that for HTTP. I don't expect that we'll do any of that for email. But that would allow us to do that would basically allow you to do web filtering, full-on web filtering on SSL sessions. The challenge, of course, would be how do you push out the root CA cert to all your machines, probably with a group policy object or something along those lines, or just manually. Reading through some of the questions. Yeah, it looks pretty good. I know we didn't get to all the questions. Sorry, we have a ton of questions. We were just looking at stuff that was related specifically to 9.4. If we didn't answer your question, jump on the forums at forums.untangle.com and create a new post, and hopefully we'll get to that. If you're asking about some support case or misconfiguration problem or or you're just having some issues, contact the support at untangle.com, or just go to untangle.com and click on the support tab on the right-hand side of the page. And the support team is standing by to help you, and we'd love to hear from you.
If you have specific questions about Untangle that weren't covered here, and you are not running Untangle yet, feel free to contact us at sales@untangle.com or give us a call, and we're happy to give you a one-on-one demo or walk you through any of the questions that you have.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. Hopefully you learned some about new 9.4. Again, you can review all the stuff on the 9.4 change log. And if you have any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everyone. And we will be sending out a recording of this tomorrow. We have the recording wrapping up here in a minute, but we really appreciate your attendance today, and especially to all of those you that have asked questions. Definitely appreciate your continued support of Untangle. Have a good day.